Okay. So let me know if this has ever happened in your house. You find out something happened to your teenager, but the problem is you didn't find out from your teenager. Maybe the school called you, maybe another parent said something, or, and this one will really get you, you find out their friends already knew. So now you're looking at your child like, wait a minute, why didn't you tell me? And they give you the teenager answer. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Because in my mind, I've already had this conversation probably more than once. I tell you all the time that you could talk to me. You know you can tell me anything. And I mean that. That's the thing. You're not saying it because it sounds like something a good parent is supposed to say. You really do want them to come to you, right? But here's what I want you to think about. What if the problem isn't that your teenager doesn't know they can talk to you? What if they know exactly what you've said, but they're not completely sure what they're going to get when they actually do it? Because these are two different things. And I know some of us don't want to hear that. We're like, no, 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 no. My child knows that they can come to me. Okay. But you knowing you would be there for them and them feeling safe enough to bring you something they know you might not like, that's not always the same thing. And that's what we're getting into today. Because if you've been wondering why your teen won't talk to you, I don't think the answer is always that they don't want a relationship. Sometimes they just don't want everything that might come with telling you. And yeah, we're going to talk about. I'm Keisha Golder, and around here, we talk about how to build emotionally intelligent relationships with our teenagers, not just how to get them to behave. And today, we're talking about emotional safety. Now, don't hear emotional safety and think, I'm going to tell you that your teenager gets to do whatever they want while you sit over there smiling and validating their feelings. Because no, you're still the parent. There can be rules, there can be consequences. Sometimes the answer is still going to be no. And sometimes they're going to get mad about that no. They'll be all right. That's not what emotional safety means. I'm talking about whether your teenager believes that they can bring you the truth when the truth isn't pretty. Because let's be real, it's easy to say you can tell me anything when anything is, Mom, I got an A. Great. I made the team. Let's go. I took your advice. Even better because now I get to pretend I wasn't waiting for you to admit that I was right. Like, come on. But what happens when anything is, Mom, I lied. I failed. I did something stupid. I'm in trouble. I know you told me not to, but did it anyway. Or the one that will test every little bit of emotional intelligence you ever thought you heard. To tell you something, but don't get mad because immediately you're like, why would I get mad? And now I really need to know what happened. But that moment, that's the moment we're talking about, not when communication is easy. What happens in your relationship when your teenager has something hard to tell you? And I don't want to spend the whole video giving you different questions to ask your teen so they'll talk more. Because you can ask the best open ended questions in the world and still get nothing. I'm fine. I don't know. And then you ask another question and another. And now they're irritated. You're irritated. And somehow we went from how was your day to everybody needing a minute. Crazy, right? But that's real life. So instead of focusing on how to get them to talk, I want us to look at something we don't talk about enough. What happens after they do? What happens when your teenager gives you information you weren't expecting? What happens when they make a decision you don't understand? What happens when what they're telling you scares you, embarrasses you, disappoints you, or makes you immediately want to fix something? Because sometimes your teenager isn't sitting there thinking, I don't want to talk to my mom. They're thinking, I don't feel like dealing with what comes after I tell her. And listen, I know this one might pinch you a little. But we're not doing this so you can beat yourself up and start going through every conversation you've ever had with your child since birth. That's not helpful. We're looking at it because once you understand what might be happening, you can start doing something different. And by the end of this conversation, I want you thinking less about why won't my teenager talk to me and more about What has my teenager learned happens when they do? Because those two questions will take you in two completely different directions. So let's start here because I think this is where a lot of us get stuck. We keep saying, but they know they can talk to me. And I'm not arguing with you. They probably do know. You've probably told them enough times that if I ask my teenagers right now, does your mother know that you can talk to her? They'd probably be like, yeah. So that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is sometimes they think you can talk to me and creating a relationship where someone actually feels comfortable talking to us are the same thing. They're not. Think about your own life. There are probably people you technically could talk to about something, but you're not going to. And you already know why. Because you know how they are. You know they're going to make it all about them. You know who's going to make it all about them. You know who's going to go into a panic. You know who's going to tell everybody. You know who's going to start giving advice before you even finish that damn story. And you definitely know who you're not telling because you don't have the energy for their reaction today. You love them. They may love you. You may even trust them in other areas. But when certain things happen, you already know. Yeah, I can go in out with this. Your teenager does that too. And I think sometimes we forget that because we're looking at the relationship through our role of mother and father, of course they should come to me. But they're not experiencing you as your role. They're experiencing you as a person. And they know your facial expressions. They know your tone. They know when you say I'm listening, but your whole face is saying, you to be kidding me. They know what makes you nervous. They know what makes you angry. They know what makes you go from listening to lecturing in 2.7 seconds. They know you better than you think they do. So when they're deciding whether to tell you something, all of that information is sitting there with them. And this is where I think we have to make a distinction. Permission is not the same as safety. You can tell me something is permission. Emotional safety is what happens when they actually try. And I want you to think about that without immediately defending yourself, because I can hear somebody right now. Well, Keisha, if they did something wrong, I'm supposed to react. I didn't say you couldn't react. We're going to get there because sometimes they absolutely did something they had no business doing. I had two sons. I'm not sitting over here pretending they don't make decisions that make you want to stare at them like, no, what made you think that was a good idea? I'm not sitting over here pretending teenagers don't make decisions that make you stare at them and be like, well, now what made you think that was a good idea? They do. But we're not talking about whether you have the right to parent them. We're talking about what they're learning about things that they bring to you. And those are two different conversations because your teenager can know my mother is going to hold me accountable and still know my mother is somebody that I can tell the truth. We want both. Now, here's where this gets interesting because you may be sitting there trying to figure out, okay, when did I make them feel like they couldn't talk to me? And you might not even be able to think of anything. There might not have been a huge moment. You didn't stand in the middle of the kitchen and announce, from this day forward, nobody tell me anything. That's usually not how this happens, right? It's little stuff, regular Tuesday night stuff. They come home and tell you they failed a test. And when they can get into what happened, you're like, see, this is what I've been talking about. You stay on that phone all night and wonder why. Now, were you wrong about the phone? Maybe not. That's not the point. They tell you something. They tell you somebody they're dating hurt their feelings, and you say, didn't I tell you? I knew I didn't like them. Again, you might have been right. And I know being right feels good, especially when you've been waiting 6 months for everybody to catch up. But your teenager didn't come to you in that moment because they needed to know whether you had correctly predicted the downfall of their relationship, their hurt, or maybe they tell you something happened with their friends and immediately, who was it? What time was it? Where were y'all? Were you over there? Who drove? Was the mother in the house? Now, they haven't even gotten into the actual story and somehow they're being cross-examined. I've been there. I've done all these things. And you're not trying to interrogate them. You're just trying to understand what happened. You're being a parent. But from their side, it can feel completely different. That's what I want us to pay attention to. Intent and experience are not always the same thing. You intended to, they experience a lecture. You intended to protect. They experience panic. You intended to understand. They experience interrogation. You intended to teach. They experience, I knew I shouldn't have said anything. And that sentence matters. Because once your teenager starts thinking, I knew I shouldn't have said anything, the next time something happens, they already have information to work. They remember, even if you don't. And that's why I don't want you sitting there trying to identify one conversation that made your teenager stop talking to you. There might not have been one. Relationships usually don't work like that. It's patterns. Little experiences stacking on top of each other. And before you know it, they start editing. They tell you part of the story. They leave out the part they think will make you mad. They wait until the situation is already handled before they mention it. Or they don't tell you at all. And here's the part I really want you to hear. That doesn't automatically mean your teenager is being dishonest. Now, could your teenager lie? Absolutely. Let's not get ridiculous. Teenagers lie, adults lie, people lie. But sometimes what you're calling secrecy is actually a teenager trying to predict how much of this conversation can I handle right now. And that's a very different way of looking at it, because now instead of only asking, why are you keeping things from me? You start getting curious about what happens between us when you don't. And whoa, that's a different question. Now, we need to clear something up, because I already know somebody has been listening to me for the last couple of minutes thinking, okay, so basically I'm supposed to let my teenager do whatever they want because I don't want to hurt their feelings. No, I don't know who said that, but it wasn't me. Emotional safety does not mean your teenagers never get uncomfortable. It doesn't mean they never hear no. It doesn't mean they don't have rules. And it definitely doesn't mean that there are no consequences. Sometimes your child is going to tell you something and you're going to be like, okay, thank you for telling me. And also, we're going to have to deal with it. Both things can be true. This is where I think parents get nervous about this kind of parenting, because sometimes connection gets confused with permissiveness. Like, if I'm trying to understand my child, somehow I've given up my authority. No, understanding somebody doesn't mean agreeing with everything they do. You can understand why your teenager made a decision and still say absolutely not. You can validate the feeling without validating the behavior. You can listen to the whole story and still give a consequence. You can be emotionally safe and still be the parent. Actually, I would argue that emotional safety makes accountability more powerful, because now the lesson isn't buried underneath, my mother doesn't understand, or my father never listens. They may still be mad about the consequence. They're teenagers, so of course, you can you can give them the most thoughtful, emotionally intelligent consequence known to mankind, and they're still going to walk upstairs mumbling under their breath. And that's okay. We're not trying to create a teenager who's happy with every parenting decision we make. We're trying to create a relationship where disagreements don't automatically mean disconnection. And here's the distinction I really want you to hold on to. The consequence can be the consequence. The relationship doesn't have to become one. You don't have to withdraw affection. You don't have to embarrass them. You don't have to make them feel stupid for telling you. You don't have to bring their vulnerability back up 3 weeks later during a different argument. Oh, and we need to talk about that for a second. Because if your teenager tells you something vulnerable and then the next time you're mad, you use that information against them, baby, they remember that. You may have said it because you were angry, and you may apologize later. You may even not remember. You may not even remember saying it. They are going to remember, because now they know that something they gave you when they were vulnerable can become ammunition when you're upset. And if you're trying to understand why your teen won't talk to you, we can't only look at whether we're available to listen. We also have to look at what we do with what they tell us after the conversation is over. That's emotional safety too. Now, let me give you another side of this, because this one can be harder to see. Sometimes your teenager isn't keeping something from you because they don't trust you. Sometimes they're thinking about how you're going to react, and they just don't have the energy for that. And listen, I know how that sounds, but because you're probably thinking, well, excuse me for having feelings, what my child is doing. You are absolutely allowed to have feelings. The question is, who manages them? Because your teenager might already be dealing with whatever happened. They got in trouble. Their friend did something. Somebody broke their heart. They made a bad decision, whatever. And now, on top of that, they're thinking, if I tell my mother, she's going to freak out. If I tell my father, he's going to start yelling. If I tell my mother I'm struggling, she's going to worry herself half to die. If I tell him, he's going to call somebody. If I tell her, she's going to start asking a million questions that I don't even know how I feel about it yet. So now they're just deciding whether they want your help. They're calculating the emotional cost of getting it. And I need us to hear that, because sometimes we think, if something is wrong, why wouldn't you come to me? Meanwhile, your teenager is thinking, because I'm going to have to deal with you too. That's a lot. And I'm not saying that to make any of us feel bad as parents. I'm saying it because this is one of those places where our emotional intelligence as parents really matters. Because our emotions walk into the room before advice ever does. Our teenager pays attention to that. Have you ever had your teenager start telling you something and you can feel yourself getting worked up before they even finish? I have. You're trying to listen, but internally, it's a whole staff meeting going on. Wait, what's happening? Who was there? Why am I just hearing about this? I knew something was off. And now, while they're talking, you're probably 10 steps ahead trying to figure out what needs to happen next. That's parenting. That's love. That's worry. And that's the part of us that wants to protect our children before we even finish hearing what they need protection from. But sometimes you have to let them finish. Not because what they're telling you isn't serious. Sometimes it's serious enough that you absolutely need to do something. But you don't always have to do it in the first 15 seconds. Sometimes the most emotionally intelligent thing you can do is give yourself, okay, let me make sure I understand what you're telling me. That's it. Because if every hard conversation immediately becomes your emergency, your teenager may eventually stop bringing you emergency. Not because they don't need you, but because they don't want to manage you while they're trying to manage themselves. And that right there is worth thinking about. Now, let's talk about the part that gets under a parent's skin. Because you'll be trying to get 2 words out of your teenager. How was your day? Fine. What did you do? Nothing. Anything happen? No. Okay. So apparently this child spent 8 hours at school staring at a wall, like most of our teenagers. According to our teenagers, that's what happened. But then you had them on FaceTime with a friend, and suddenly they have a TED talk. Details, feelings, backstory, contacts, names, dates, time. They're doing a character analysis. And you're sitting there like, oh, so you know how to talk. And if we're being real, that can hurt. But underneath the irritation is, sometimes, why do they get that part of you and I don't? Especially when you've spent years being the person who took care of them. You've been there, you've shown up, you've sacrificed. So when your teenagers start sharing parts of themselves with other people that they're not sharing with you, yeah, that can feel personal. But I want you to be careful here, because if you turn that hurt into, you tell your little friends everything, but you can't tell your own mother anything, they're probably not going to hear, I miss being close to you. They're going to hear pressure. And now talking to you comes with guilt too. So let's look at it differently. Your teenager may not be talking to their friends because their friends are wiser than you. I hope their friends aren't. Their friends probably don't have the answers. And half the time they're all sitting around trying to figure out life together. But their friends don't carry the same authority you do. And that changes the risk. If your teenager tells their friends, I failed my test, their friend can't take the phone. If they say, I think I like this person, their friend isn't going to turn that into a conversation about dating rules. If they admit I did something stupid, their friend isn't deciding the consequence. That's why vulnerability with you can feel different. You have power in their life. And I don't mean like some evil villain sitting in a chair deciding everyone's fate. I mean, you're the parent. You're responsible. Your response can actually change what happens next. So, of course, they think about your response. That's why I don't want parents competing with teenage friends. Your job isn't to become their 16-year-old best friend. Please don't. They have friends. They need you to be their parent. But you can be a parent who understands that telling you the truth sometimes feels like a bigger risk. And once you understand that, you can start thinking about what you do when they take that. Because every time they bring something difficult, they're going to give you an opportunity to show them, you can bring me hard things here, not You can bring hard things here and nothing will happen. Those are not the same thing. But you can bring hard things here and we'll figure out what happens next together. That's it. And there's one little sentence teenagers say, I think that tells us so much. Can I tell you something? And then, but are you going to get mad? Now, if you're anything like me, the minute somebody says that, you're already suspicious. Because why are you starting like that? What happened? But I want you to hear that question differently. Because when your teenager asks, are you going to get mad? They may not be asking you to promise that you're going to like what they're about to say. They're trying to figure out, is it safe for me to finish this conversation? And here's what I want you to picture in that moment. Your teenager is standing there, maybe in the kitchen. Maybe they came into your room. Maybe y'all land in a car and they're looking out the window because apparently eye contact will make the entire conversation impossible, right? And they're debating, do I tell her? Do I leave this part out? Do I wait? Do I handle it myself? And here's what I want you to realize. They're not making the decision from scratch. They're remembering you. They're remembering the last hard conversation. They're remembering your face, your tone, whether you listened, whether you interrupted, whether you told somebody after they asked you not to, whether you brought it up again later, whether you made them feel stupid, whether you immediately made it about what they should have done. And they're remembering what happened the last time they let you into something uncomfortable. And that is why I keep saying emotional safety isn't created because you told your teenager they can talk to you. It's created through what they experience when they actually do. Because your teenager isn't only deciding whether to tell you something, they're remembering the last time they did. And I want you to sit with that for a second. Not so you can go, oh my God, I've ruined everything. No, we're not doing that because you've probably had some beautiful conversations with your teenager too. You've probably gotten things right. You've probably been there for them in ways that they don't even realize matter. And you've probably gotten some things wrong. Welcome to parenting. There is not a parent on earth who has responded perfectly to every difficult thing their child has ever brought. I know I haven't. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you realize later, yeah, I probably could have handled that differently. Okay. Then handle the next one differently. That's the opportunity. Because if emotional safety can be learned through repeated experience, it can also be rebuilt through repeated experience. And that matter. That means you don't need one perfect conversation to fix everything. You need to start creating different experiences. So after all this, you're probably thinking, okay, Keisha, what am I supposed to do? And I'm going to tell you something that sounds completely backwards, considering you clicked on a video about why your teen won't talk to you. Stop trying to get them to talk. Seriously. Because sometimes we get so focused on getting information that we don't realize how much pressure we're creating. How was school? Fine. What happened today? Nothing. What's wrong? Nothing. You seem upset. I'm fine. Are you sure? Yes. Did something happen? No. Did somebody say something? No. Isn't your friends in your life? See? That's exactly why you can't talk to them. But baby, you just conducted a full investigation. Sometimes they really aren't ready. Sometimes they don't have the words yet. Sometimes they don't know what they feel. Sometimes they need a minute before they want to talk. And sometimes they may never give you every single detail. That's another one we don't always like. Because as parents, we start believing closeness means access to everything. It doesn't. Your teenager is becoming their own person. They're going to have thoughts you don't know, conversations you're not part of, experiences they need time to process. That's not automatically disconnection. So instead of making, I need my teenager to tell me everything the goal, make this the goal. When my teenager chooses to tell me something, I want them to experience me as someone who can handle the truth. That's something you can control. And here's where I want you to practice one thing, not 7. Not a whole communication system you're supposed to memorize while your teenager is standing in front of you. One thing. Let your first response make room for the rest of the story. That's it. Before you correct, before you solve, before you start figuring out consequences, before you remind them that you've already warned them, just make room. Okay, tell me what happened. I'm listening. Thank you for telling me. Okay, what happened? You don't have to agree. You don't even have to know what you're going to do yet. And if what they're telling you has your blood pressure somewhere around your eyebrow, you can say, I want to respond to this well, so give me a second. There is nothing wrong with taking a minute. I'd rather you take a minute than say something in 10 seconds that shuts down the next 10 conversations. And then once you've heard them, parents, have the conversation, set the boundary if one needs to be set, give the consequence if one needs to happen. Help them solve the problem if that's what they need. But don't make correction the price they have to pay just to finish telling you the truth. Because remember, every conversation teaches your teenager whether it's safe to have the next. So, if you came into this conversation asking, why won't my teenager talk to me? I want you to leave with a different question. Not what's wrong with my teenager, not why are they so secretive, not even how do I get them to open up. Ask yourself, what has my teenager learned happens when they talk to me? And be curious about the answer, not defensive, not guilty, just curious, because you may realize, okay, sometimes I jump straight into fixing, or I ask a lot of questions because I know I do. Or, yeah, when I'm scared, it comes out sounding like anger. Or maybe you'll realize your teenager actually does bring you more than you thought. They just don't bring it in the way that you were expecting. Pay attention to that too, because teenagers don't always walk in and say, Mother, I would like to engage in some emotionally vulnerable conversation. Sometimes they come in your room at 11:47 at night and start talking about something completely random. I had one of those experiences this past weekend. Sometimes they get in a car and mention something that happened 3 days ago. Sometimes they send you a text from upstairs, which is technically my life at this point. Sometimes they start talking while you're cooking and act like what they're saying isn't a big deal at all. Don't miss the invitation because it doesn't look like the conversation you were waiting for. And please, after watching this video, do not go find your teenager and say, don't you feel emotionally safe talking to me? Please don't do that. You don't need to force a big conversation about your relationship tonight. Start smaller. The next time they give you a piece of their world, notice what you do with it because you don't need them to hand you the whole story today. Show them what happens when they trust you with the piece they gave you. And over time, that's how you become somebody they know they can come back to. Not because you told them, but because you've shown them. And that's what being the emotionally safe parent is really about. And if you're still sitting there thinking, okay, Keisha, I can see some places I can do this differently, but I don't really know where to start. That's exactly why I wrote Bridging the Teen Gap. Because sometimes you know you want a better relationship with your teenager. You know you want them to feel like they can come to you. But when you're actually in the moment and emotions are high, all that good parenting can go out of the window. So the book helps you slow some of those moments down and start looking at what's happening underneath the communication, not just what your teenager is saying or doing. I'll put the information for Bridging the Teen Gap in the description. But before you go, there's one more piece that I want us to talk about because today we talked about what happens when your teenager brings something to you. Next, I want us to talk about what happens before they ever decide to bring it to you in the first place. Because trust isn't built when your teenager walks in the room and says, Mom, we need to talk. By then, they're already bringing everything they've learned about you into the conversation. Trust gets built when you're driving them somewhere, when they tell you a random story you don't really care about, when they make a mistake, when they disagree, when they're irritated, when you're irritated. All of those little moments that don't look important, they are. So, in the next episode, we're getting into why your teen can shut down before an argument even starts and how the everyday relationship you're building with them affects what happens when those big conversations come. I'll see you guys over there.